Everyone in the courtroom laughed, except for the teenager standing at the defense table. He wasn't here to beg for mercy. He was here to win. Before we begin, I have a challenge for you. If you think this teenager will shock the entire courtroom, comment 1 and hit that subscribe button. If you think the judge will crush him, drop a like. Either way, make sure to watch until the end, because the final twist will leave you speechless. Judge Harrison barely glanced at the young man standing at the defendant's table, his expression unreadable but his eyes filled with quiet contempt. To him, this wasn't a case. It was an inconvenience. Just another reckless kid who thought he could outsmart the law. The courtroom in Houston County Courthouse was thick with tension, the air suffocating, heavy with the weight of unspoken judgment. Spectators packed the gallery, whispering, smirking, waiting for the inevitable takedown. They had seen this play out before. A black teenager standing trial for grand theft auto. There was only one way this story ended. Cameron Reed, 19, stood still, his hands in his pockets, his chin lifted just enough to show he wasn't afraid. But Judge Harrison wasn't impressed. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers lazily against his desk. "You think you're some kind of legal genius?" His voice dripped with amusement. "This isn't a high school debate, son." Laughter rippled through the courtroom, low, knowing chuckles from the bailiff, the stenographer, even the prosecutor, Bradley Kent. They were all in on the joke. Cameron was supposed to be humiliated, stripped down to nothing before being thrown into the system like so many before him. But Cameron didn't laugh. He didn't flinch. He had spent his entire life preparing for this moment, even if he hadn't known it would come. Judge Harrison thought this trial was just another routine conviction. He had no idea the storm that was coming. "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor." For the first time, Judge Harrison actually looked at him. Not just a passing glance, but a full assessing stare. A slow, skeptical smirk crept onto his face. "You'll what?" The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. The bailiff's eyebrows shot up. The prosecutor, Bradley Kent, let out a sharp, condescending chuckle. "This should be good," Kent muttered under his breath, shaking his head. Cameron didn't blink, didn't fidget, didn't react. He had been preparing for this moment his entire life, even if he hadn't known it. While his friends memorized basketball stats, he memorized case law. While others played video games, he played trials in his head. He grew up watching his mother, a paralegal for 20 years, break down cases at the dinner table, exposing the flaws, the shortcuts, the corruption. He knew exactly how the system worked, and more importantly, he knew how to dismantle it. Judge Harrison tapped his gavel lightly. "All right, Mr. Reed," he said, his tone dripping with amusement. "Let's hear it. Try not to embarrass yourself." A few people in the courtroom snickered. They thought this was a joke. They had no idea what was coming. Cameron exhaled slowly, adjusting his stance, hands still in his pockets. He let the silence stretch, just long enough to make them uncomfortable. Then, finally, he turned toward the prosecution. "Mr. Kent," Cameron said smoothly, "before I begin, I just want to confirm something." The prosecutor raised an eyebrow, still smirking. "Go ahead." Cameron took a step forward. "You stated that Officer Daniel Ruiz personally witnessed me behind the wheel of the stolen vehicle before I was arrested, correct?" Kent let out a bored sigh. "That's right." "And that testimony is written in his official report?" "Of course it is." Cameron nodded, then turned to Judge Harrison. "Your Honor, I move to dismiss that testimony as evidence." The room went dead silent. Judge Harrison squinted at him. "On what grounds?" Cameron pulled his hands from his pockets for the first time. He pointed at the prosecution's table. "Because Officer Ruiz never saw me in that car. In fact, he wasn't even on duty when the chase began." The words hit like a gunshot. For the first time, the prosecutor's smirk faltered. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. "What are you talking about?" Kent snapped. Cameron took another step forward, his voice calm, unwavering. "If the court allows me, I'd like to submit a request to verify Officer Ruiz's GPS logs from that night. If his report states he witnessed me in the vehicle, then his location history should confirm that." He let the words hang in the air. But I have a feeling it won't. The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. The judge's expression darkened. He turned to Kent. "Counselor, does the prosecution have any issue with verifying the officer's GPS logs?" A muscle in Kent's jaw twitched. He hesitated. Just for a second. But it was long enough. The jury noticed, the gallery noticed, and most importantly, Judge Harrison noticed. The silence was deafening. Finally, after a long pause, Kent cleared his throat. "No objections, Your Honor." But the shift had already begun. For the first time since this trial started, the prosecution wasn't in control anymore. The laughter was gone. The arrogance was cracking. And everyone in that courtroom was about to witness a war. Did you see that? The moment Cameron flipped the script, the entire courtroom felt it. The judge isn't smirking anymore. And the prosecutor, he's scrambling. Now, the real battle begins. What do you think? Will Cameron completely dismantle the case, or will the system fight back? Drop a 1 in the comments if you believe he's got this, and hit like if you love seeing power shift in real time. And trust me, it's only going to get crazier from here. Stay tuned, because what Cameron does next, it's going to change everything. Keep watching until the end because the final twist will leave you speechless. The whispers in the gallery turned into hushed gasps. The jury shifted in their seats, eyes darting between Cameron and the prosecution. Even Judge Harrison, who had been lazily flipping through the case file moments ago, was now sitting up straight, his smirk fading. But Cameron wasn't done, not even close. Bradley Kent adjusted his tie, trying to keep his cool. "Your Honor, while we wait for the GPS records, the fact remains. The defendant's fingerprints were found on the steering wheel of the stolen vehicle. That evidence alone is damning." Cameron gave a slow nod, as if he was actually considering Kent's argument. Then he took a deliberate step forward, locking eyes with the jury. "Let's talk about that fingerprint evidence for a second." The room went still. "The prosecution wants you to believe that my fingerprints on the steering wheel mean I stole the car. That's their entire argument. But let's break that down logically." He tilted his head slightly, keeping his voice calm, controlled, deadly. He turned slightly, addressing the jury like he had done it 100 times before. "Say you walk into a department store and try on a jacket. You slip your hands in the pockets, zip it up, then put it back on the rack and walk out. Later that day, someone shoplifts that same jacket. The store finds your fingerprints on it. Does that mean you stole it?" A few jurors exchanged glances. Someone in the gallery let out a quiet "damn." Cameron let the silence stretch before continuing. "The car in question was parked outside a 7-Eleven hours before the alleged theft. I was inside that store with 3 friends. And yeah, when we walked past the car, I leaned against it. I even opened the door, because it was already unlocked." He shrugged, letting that detail sink in. "I didn't think much of it. Didn't take the car, didn't drive it, didn't steal a damn thing from inside, just a dumb moment of curiosity." He exhaled slowly, then dropped the hammer. "Does touching something make you a criminal?" A ripple of unease spread through the jury box. Even Judge Harrison was rubbing his chin now, his smirk completely gone. Kent, desperate to regain control, flipped through his notes. "Your Honor, the fingerprint analysis was conducted by forensic specialists. The defendant is trying to mislead the jury." Cameron turned to face the judge. "Speaking of forensics, Your Honor, I have one more question." Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead." Cameron's expression didn't change. "Was the forensic specialist who analyzed the fingerprints subpoenaed to testify?" Kent stiffened. His hesitation was just a fraction of a second too long. The judge glanced at the prosecutor. "Was the forensic examiner called to testify, Counselor?" Kent cleared his throat, flipping through his papers like he was searching for an answer he already knew wasn't there. Finally, he muttered, "No, Your Honor." And that was it. Cameron's lips pressed into a thin line. "So let me get this straight. The state is using forensic evidence to try and convict me, but they didn't think it was necessary to bring in the actual specialist who processed that evidence? No chance for me to cross-examine them? No opportunity to challenge the chain of custody?" Silence. Cameron nodded like he had just proved a point. "Interesting." Judge Harrison let out a slow breath, tapping his fingers against his desk again. But this time there was no amusement behind it, Just frustration, because he knew exactly what was happening. This case was unraveling fast, and there wasn't a damn thing the prosecution could do to stop it. What had started as a routine case, a young black man standing trial, a judge barely paying attention, a prosecutor coasting toward an easy conviction, had become something else entirely. Cameron Reed wasn't just defending himself. He was tearing their case apart piece by piece, and everyone in that room knew it. Judge Harrison sat back, rubbing his temple. His casual arrogance from earlier was gone. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't dismissive. He was annoyed. And for the first time, maybe even a little uneasy. But Cameron wasn't finished. Bradley Kent, the once confident prosecutor, cleared his throat. Your Honor, while the defense may try to cast doubt, the fact remains— Cameron cut him off. The fact remains that you have no forensic expert, no reliable eyewitness, and an officer whose testimony is about to be proven false. He turned toward the jury, his voice sharpening. So let's talk about the one thing you keep clinging to, the so-called stolen vehicle. Kent clenched his jaw. The defendant was found in possession of the stolen Audi A6. That is indisputable. Cameron smirked. Is it, though? A murmur ran through the gallery. The prosecution would have you believe that I was caught red-handed, that I was driving the vehicle when police arrested me. That's the story they're selling. Cameron let his voice drop, steady, deliberate. But it's a lie. Judge Harrison straightened. Watch yourself, Mr. Reed. Cameron didn't flinch. No, Your Honor, I'm asking them to watch the facts. And then he pulled out the one piece of evidence that changed everything. Cameron reached into his file, pulled out a printed transcript, and held it up. This is a police report from the night the car was stolen. Specifically, it includes a statement from the car's registered owner. Mr. Raymond Whitaker. Kent's expression hardened. He knew what was coming. Cameron turned toward the jury. Let me read this for you. He cleared his throat, then spoke the words that sent a ripple of shock through the room. I left my car running when I ran inside the gas station. Some kid must have jumped in and taken off, but it wasn't the guy you arrested. I saw the kid and he was white. Boom. The room exploded in murmurs. A gasp from someone in the jury box. A few reporters scribbling furiously in their notebooks. The judge's gavel slammed down once, twice. Order! Harrison barked. But the damage was done. Cameron lowered the paper, locking eyes with the prosecutor. That statement was filed with the police the same night, and yet somehow it was never included in the prosecution's case. He raised an eyebrow. Now why is that? Kent was seething. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. Cameron turned on him. Irrelevant? The actual owner of the vehicle, the man whose car was supposedly stolen, gave a direct statement that the person who took it didn't even match my description. And you're calling that irrelevant? He scoffed. Seems pretty damn relevant to me. Judge Harrison's face was unreadable, but his silence spoke volumes. Cameron took another step forward, his voice slicing through the air like a blade. The real suspect got away that night. The officers found a black kid in the same general area and decided that was close enough. That's what this case is really about. The words hung in the air, heavy, inescapable. Judge Harrison rubbed his forehead. For the first time since the trial started, he looked tired, like a man realizing this case wasn't just a simple conviction anymore. It was a problem. Counselor, Harrison said, turning to Kent. Does the prosecution have anything further? Kent's shoulders were rigid, his jaw tight, but he knew. They all knew. No, Your Honor. The shift had already happened. The power had changed hands. And this time, it belonged to Cameron Reed. Did you catch that? Cameron just exposed the biggest lie in the courtroom. The prosecution's case is crumbling and now everyone is scrambling. This trial isn't just about him anymore. It's about the truth they tried to bury. What would you do in Cameron's position? Drop a 1 in the comments if you're rooting for him, and hit like if you believe the justice system needs to change. And here's the real question. Will the judge admit the truth, or will he try to shut Cameron down? Stick around, because what happens next? It's the moment that will change everything. Keep watching. This fight isn't over yet. Judge Harrison sat rigid, his fingers steepled in front of his face, eyes locked onto Cameron like he was seeing him for the first time. Bradley Kent, once smug, was now a man drowning, scrambling to grab onto anything that could save his sinking case. The gallery, packed with spectators who had walked in expecting an easy conviction, was buzzing with an energy that no one could contain. And Cameron? He was just getting started. "Your Honor," he said, voice steady, unwavering. "I have one final point before this jury makes their decision." Harrison exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple like he already knew what was coming. "Make it quick." Cameron turned back to the jury. This was it. The final nail in the coffin. "You've seen how this case has played out," he began, letting his words settle. "You've seen the inconsistencies, the missing testimony, the officer who supposedly saw me in the car but wasn't even on duty, the fingerprints used as evidence but with no forensic expert to back them up, and now a witness, the actual car owner, who says I don't even match the description of the real suspect." He let his eyes scan across the jurors, making sure he had their attention. This case should have never made it this far. His voice sharpened, cutting through the courtroom like a blade. "I was arrested not because I was guilty, not because there was real evidence against me. I was arrested because I fit a description, because I was close enough." Kent shot up from his seat. "Objection! The defendant is—" Cameron turned to him, fire burning behind his eyes. "What? Stating the obvious?" Harrison didn't even look at Kent this time. He simply waved him off. "Sit down, counselor." Kent clenched his jaw but obeyed. He knew there was no saving this. Cameron inhaled deeply, steadying himself before delivering his final blow. "This isn't just about me," he said, his voice lowering but somehow carrying even more weight. "How many others have been in this exact position? How many people have sat at this very table, accused, with no real evidence against them? How many cases get rushed through not because the accused is guilty but because the system doesn't care enough to make sure they aren't?" The silence in the room was deafening. Cameron took one last step forward. "You're not just deciding my fate today," he said, voice sharp, clear. "You're deciding what kind of justice system you believe in." Then he stepped back. Judge Harrison inhaled deeply, exhaled through his nose. His jaw tightened as he glanced at Kent one last time, then at the jury. He looked down, tapped his gavel against the bench, and spoke the words that would stay with everyone in that room. "Case dismissed." The words landed like a bomb. For a second, there was only stunned silence. Then, chaos. The gallery erupted. Some people gasped in disbelief. Others let out a low murmur of relief. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashing as the reality of what just happened set in. Cameron didn't move. He stood still, absorbing the moment, letting it settle. He hadn't just won. He had shattered everything they thought they knew about this case. Judge Harrison, still gripping his gavel, watched him carefully, and in his eyes Cameron saw something unexpected. Recognition. Maybe even regret. But Cameron didn't need his approval. He had already won. And this courtroom wouldn't be the last one he stood in. "Cameron, did you know the judge would dismiss the case? How does it feel to outmaneuver a seasoned prosecutor? What are you going to do next?" He ignored them all. This wasn't about proving how smart he was. This was about something bigger. At the bottom of the steps, his mother, Denise, was waiting, arms crossed, expression unreadable. For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then, finally, she let out a breath. "Boy, you scared me half to death." Cameron chuckled, scratching the back of his head. "Had to take a risk, Ma." She shook her head, then pulled him into a tight hug. Across the street, Judge Harrison watched. No arrogance, no smirk, just quiet reflection. Because today, the system blinked first. And Cameron, he wasn't done yet. The justice system still runs on bias, assumptions, and quick convictions. But Cameron proved that knowledge is power. He didn't just defend himself, he exposed a broken system. His case is a wake-up call. How many others don't get the chance to fight back? With technology and awareness growing, the power is shifting. Injustice thrives in silence, but stories like Cameron's can force change. His battle is won, but the fight isn't over. Now we ask you, what's next for Cameron? Should he go to law school? Start an initiative to help others? Drop a comment and share your thoughts. If this story moved you, share it. Let's make sure no one else has to fight alone.